So last album for the evening, fellas. Going a little long tonight, but that's all right. This is Pavement, Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. And in the opening montage, you heard Gold Sounds. And now you're going to hear a clip from Range Life.
I want a range life. If I could settle down. If I could settle down. Then I would settle down.
All right, so Crooked Rain by Pavement comes in at number 36 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 8 in 1994, number 176 of all time. It's Pavement's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It also made Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 434 there, and Pavement is ranked number 108 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So this is the second time we're covering them. This album was released it's their second album. The album was released on February 14th, 1994. So it's their second album out of a total of 5. And we did previously cover their debut album, Slanted and Enchanted, earlier this season. So I'm going to kind of pick up where we left off from there. It's basically like, I think what one of the big things that happened during the recording of this record is like a little bit of a change in personnel. If you guys remember that the first album was just guitarists Scott Canberg and Stephen Malkmus, as well as their drummer Gary Young, who was, if you remember, was about 10 or plus years older than them. He owned the studio that they recorded in, and they just had him to become their drummer.
Didn't he just die recently, like last year? I remember reading.
Yes. Yeah, it was recently. Gotcha, he passed away. Yep. I think he was in his 70s. So lived a decent life. Not a terribly untimely death, but still sad. So Gary Young, during the tour of Slanted and Enchanted, his behavior was becoming a little bit more erratic. He was excessively drinking. And there were some things that he was doing that were kind of a little odd, like he would hand out cabbage and mashed potatoes to fans at the door of the venues that they would play at. And he would perform handstands on stage, and he would drunkenly fall off his drum stool and run around the venue while the band was playing. Just like random things that were kind of starting to wear a little thin with some of the band members. Oddly enough,
after the first album, I remember us doing the bio and I remember laughing. Mm-hmm. Didn't they have to hire a second drummer because he didn't always want to drum, and so they hired somebody to play?
Not a drummer necessarily, but a percussionist, and that was Bob Nastanovich, who was friends with Malkmus. He was kind of on hand to play percussion when Young was kind of either not present or not able to totally carry out his duties. So that's kind of how he joined the band, and he stayed a member throughout their I
remember thinking that was tenure. Hilarious.
Yes. And the other funny thing was that, so despite all of his antics, he was still struggling to kind of keep up with the band when they were touring. He didn't really enjoy life on the road. He was kind of, he's an older guy and kind of wanted to stay home a little bit more. He also, I read this, they also say that he wanted health insurance. It was bothered by the fact that they didn't have health insurance, where the other guys couldn't care less.
In a band?
We're 25. What do we need a health insurance
how does
for?
One get health insurance in a band?
They don't. That's what he was.
Yeah.
The band was totally cool with it, but he was like, well, I'm 40. I should have health insurance. So he was kind of having maybe a little bit of a midlife crisis there. Like, what the hell am I doing?
I like Gary Young already. He's my favorite member of Pavement.
That would be like, as a 40-ish year old person.
Yes.
That would make sense, like with a bunch of 25-year-olds.
Yes, so it was pretty funny. But basically, they essentially parted ways. I think officially Young left the band, but if he didn't leave, that they were gonna, that they were probably gonna kick him out anyway. So they take on a new drummer by the name of Steve West, who was actually a friend of Nastanovich's and also was friendly with Stephen Malkmus. So he joins the band and provides a different type of drumming. They said that they described his drumming as kind of being slower, a little bit more deliberate, and so he kind of brought a different style into the band. The big song on this record was "Cut Your Hair." I believe that it's their highest charting single of the band's career. It did hit number 10 on the U.S. charts, oddly enough. And the video is pretty funny. I like the description of the video here. It's all the guys, like, they walk into a barber shop and various things that each one of them individually gets up to go get his hair cut, and a variety of things happen. Like, one of the guys goes up there and he sneezes, and like the next thing you know, a cat comes out. So it's like he sneezed out a cat. Another guy goes and sits in the barber chair in a gorilla suit, and then when he comes up, he's a human, right? And one of the guys, like, is drinking a flask and then tries to drink the barber's Barbasol, and the barber, like, smacks it away from him and stuff like that. So all that stuff is kind of happening. And then it also that video made its way onto Beavis and Butthead. And so in that video, Butthead made the comment that, quote, "This is supposed to be funny," is what his quote was. And they also called it butt wipe music. And and encouraged the band to, quote, "try harder." So that was the Beavis and Butthead take on it. So yeah, so you've got, again, the members of the band, just to recap, is Mark Eibald on bass, Scott Canberg on guitar, vocals, organ, and percussion, Bob Nastanovich on percussion and backing vocals, Stephen Malkmus on lead vocals and guitar, and new drummer Steve West. So there you go. The recording for this album was pretty smooth. Lo-fi was basically done in some dude's apartment near Madison Square Garden in New York. 2 rooms. Most of it was recorded initially with Malkmus and West, kind of, figuring out the structure of the song, and then the other members would kind of contribute as they came here and there. The record company, Matador Records, didn't really check in with the band at all and didn't bother them, so the band felt pretty free to kind of make a record that they wanted to make. So it was pretty happy times for Pavement around this time. There was some controversy around the song Range Life, which does call out in the final verse a couple of 90s bands, particularly Smashing Pumpkins and Stone Temple Pilots. Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins took a particular offense to his band's inclusion in this song. And he and even though Malkmus, later said that there was no malice, he basically said they were just looking for another verse, and he just threw some stuff together and said that line was really taken from the perspective of an aging, kind of baby boomer that was just like, I don't get this music anymore. It was more of that rather than it was actually Malkmus not liking Stone Temple Pilots or Smashing Pumpkins. But Billy Corgan, he and Malkmus still traded barbs in the press, and eventually Pavement was supposed to play Lollapalooza in 1994. But they were actually kicked off that tour because Billy Corgan threatened to pull the Smashing Pumpkins from the shows if Pavement was invited as well. So so Lollapalooza said, "All right, we would rather have the Smashing Pumpkins than Pavement." So they got the boot because of that song Range Life. But fortunately enough for Pavement, the next year, 1995, they were invited on the Lollapalooza tour and played there. So.
Billy Corgan's such a snowflake, man. Give me a break.
Yeah, so there you go. So I think this album is widely considered by many to be their favorite, the best Pavement record. It's gotten a lot of high praise in the press, and I'm curious to hear your takes. Let's start with Josh on this. What do you think, Josh?
Oh, this was a tricky one, guys. I think my expectations were maybe too high or not calibrated right. This may be an album like The Last Splash, the Breeders album, where I'm gonna have to give it more listens. I feel like they're doing a lot of, I did like the album overall, but I liked Slanted and Enchanted more ultimately. That's where I kind of come down so far. I feel like they are trying a lot of different things and doing a lot of different forays into genres, and I feel like maybe Slanted and Enchanted, I'm remembering, is kind of more unified in its approach, I think. So maybe it's just the kind of what I feel is like the more experimental nature of this. There's like practically like a jazz song in 5 - 4 = Unity. We've got Range Life, which is country western song. It's practically like a Wilco song. I thought it was a Wilco song at first in terms of its sound. You still have kind of like the pop stuff that I really like in Silence Kid and Cut Your Hair, which is clearly like like a hit from like right from the opening lines of that song. You can tell that it's different than all the other songs on this album in terms of kind of that approachability and and pop sensibility. They, I mean, they are doing different things. They're still using some like distortion or kind of like fuzz or something on their songs, but there's something about it that just didn't fully cohere with me, or I wasn't grabbed by it in the same way I was with their first album. I'm guessing people like it more in some respects, or critics or whoever like it more because of its forays into different genres and maybe like a complexity that Slanted and Enchanted didn't have. The vocals delivery sound the same as the first album, and there's not too much deviation, I guess, ultimately from the first album, but there wasn't the thing that grabbed me or that I was surprised by in the way I was with the first album. So I'm gonna give it like a mild thumbs up. I think it's a pretty good album. It's just not like as great as I thought the first one was.
Yeah, I enjoy this album. Pavement is such an interesting group for me in that I enjoy the minor chords and the discordant sounds they have. Yeah. It's always very interesting to me, and I like the fact they take chances. In some ways, I like the palette of music on this album more. I liked Slanted and Enchanted as an album more than I like this, but I liked the piece, the music pieces that went into this album, and I actually think Stephen Malkmus's lyrics were more coherent on this, and thus I connected with them a little bit more. He does push the bounds for me, though, of just how bad a vocalist you can be. And it is, you almost feel like you're being trolled at some points with some of this stuff. And there's so many times where I'm like, God, I just wish they had just like
a better singer.
a better, but that doesn't even need to be a good singer, but like just someone who was more enjoyable for me to listen to at different times. Like Range Life's a perfect example of that.
Yeah,
like if you just had like a Jeff Tweedy type or like basically anybody with like a functional voice, that song would really be elevated. But like I can understand how you might appreciate the take he's doing on it and feel like it adds something to it, but track after track of that like warble, does wear on me a little bit. And that's always been a little bit of my, argument with Pavement a little bit. Like, the Beavis and Butthead take is funny because there is a little bit like, come on, fucking, just attempt to. I think I've even heard Stephen Malkmus sing more on tune, but, that's why we say like Pavement's the ultimate like Gen X band, right? Because they're the slacker band as slackers, which is an easy thing. But there's musical choices and lyrical choices here that are very strong. I've gone on the record before on Slanted and Enchanted. Like, I don't get, like, the level of hosannas that are so high where it's like, this is, reinventing alternative rock type deal like you would hear often in the 90s at the time or from different people. I think that's died down a little bit, though, over the last 15 to 20 years, and only, like, the true diehard, pitchfork types are still there. And because I don't have to be confronted with like, there's certain groups like, or certain artists like PJ Harvey that were treated that way. And then you listen to them and you're like, well, yeah, this is still fucking really good. And it's also doing some new things. And then there's acts like Pavement that I enjoy their albums, but it's like, it was almost a barrier to me. Like, listen, these guys are good, but they're not doing so much different than than things like, they sound different, but they're not more revolutionary than like some of the things like, My Bloody Valentine or Jesus and Mary Chain, right? Like those were much more like when you listen to them, like think, ooh, I may like or not like this, but they're doing something different. Like this falls firmly in alternative rock and firmly into things that like sonically that like Galaxy 500 when we did them in the 80s was doing, playing around with minor chords and stretching out stuff and playing it together. And it's a very interesting listen. I appreciate having Pavement around because I think they have a different take on alternative. They're truly alternative music in the way that things like the Flaming Lips are and stuff like that, where it's like they're not trying to. There's something seductive about when a band's actively not trying to win you over. It's like, we're going to put this out here and you're just going to process it. And if you hate it, you get the feeling they don't give a shit. You know what I mean? It's like, fine, that's cool. You hate it, or if you like it, I don't think they're going to be like bowled over with being praised either. So I respect that element of them, but I'd say this is a recommend for me. I like this album, but it's an easy take, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong take. I just wish Stephen Malkmus sang a little bit better sometimes.
Yeah.
Totally understandable. This is the Pavement album. This is the one that I was most familiar with. I've had this album for many years, and this is the album that makes me love Pavement. This album just gets better with age. It doesn't surprise me that, Josh, you listened to it this week, and it's like, I don't know what to make of this. It's all over the place. Like, that's totally valid. That's probably how I was when I first heard it as well. But I was also able to pick up, I think one of the things that stands out for me, and I've mentioned this many times before, it does that thing where it underneath all the kind of weird noises, whether it's his voice or whether it's the discordant guitar or the different odd choices that they throw in, like, and there's even wrong notes on here, right? Like, it's not like they're trying to play they just actually screwed up when they were recording and they left it in there, and then they produced it around that because they kind of just, I wouldn't say it's because they were lazy. They found it interesting to do that, right? Like, because most bands, oh shoot, I played the wrong thing here. Let's redo it. They didn't do that here. They actually that's almost like what makes the album.
It's the art rock approach. You know what I mean? It's like the mistake is half the art. Yeah.
Right. But in spite of all of that, underneath a lot of this, there's some really good melodies. There's some really good pop hooks happening in here, and sometimes it's right in your face, like a song like Cut Your Hair or Gold Sounds or Range Life, which happen to be like the singles of this from this record, but it's also in a song like Silence Kid, and it's also in for like, Stop Breathing, right? Stop Breathing's a really cool song. Like, that's just the way that song ends and builds and kind of just takes in this wacky adventure kind of a thing is just, it's just a really great song, right? It's really, interesting and unique. I don't know, John. Yeah, it's certainly alternative rock. It's one of the definitive, Gen X bands. I would say, Stephen Malkmus and Jay Mascis are probably, maybe Malkmus edges him out a little bit more for having that lazy vocals, but Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. is it's a very similar kind of thing. It's almost like they're purposefully phoning it in and trying just to get on to the next track so they can just go home. It's like they're
vocally,
they're not,
exactly.
Yes.
Dinosaur Jr.'s way more in line with the traditional song structure. They just have a lot of like feedback and stuff.
Sure, but I'm referring just to the vocals, right? The how the vocals sound. It's a lazy kind of not. Yep. It's a little bit of a whiny. It's a little bit of It's like it's
what's
like
funny?
Not trying to sing, right?
Which
I'm okay with.
As I listened to this album too, I thought to myself, this style of singing and stuff is a little bit of a cousin with what Rivers Cuomo does, but he's just more on tune if you think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you an idea of what like it would sound like if like Pavement was more in tune and didn't keep the missed notes in it.
Yeah. But I think I've also been aware of Pavement and certainly this album for long enough to know that like to just expect that to happen, right? It's not so off-putting to me, maybe as it might have been initially, right? Because it's not like I heard Pavement the first time around and I was like, I love this, right? I was kind of like, wait, what's going on here, But I've become used to this is how it sounds, and so if you did have someone like a Jeff Tweedy or a Rivers Cuomo or somebody with a more of a traditional quote-unquote better voice, I still think it would be good, but it also wouldn't be Pavement, right? Because the nature of Pavement is to have that Malkmus kind of lazy vocal styling, So I've become accustomed to it, and I think it's kind of cool. I think it still sound, I think everything all kind of put together makes for a really cool sounding record. So I hadn't listened to this in a while. And I was really into it this week around. I think this is a fantastic record. I love the way that it ends with Feel More Jive. That kind of jam that they go into is just it's kind of unique. It's kind of for them anyway, right? It's a really cool way to end the record. I got a greater appreciation for Gold Sounds, and I was just like, geez, I don't remember. I always remember Range Life being the song that stood out when I first heard this record, I was like, that's the song I like the most, and it makes sense because it's also got that alt country, vibe, which I've always, pretty much gravitated towards. But Gold Sound stood out this time to me as being like a standout track for sure.
I've always loved Hit the Plane Down too.
Hit the Plane Down is good. Yeah, that's the one song that Malkmus didn't write on this record. That was written by Canberg. Just to point that out. And also Cut Your Hair. I forgot to mention this, but that was actually, you might have sounded familiar in another context. That was not the exact song, but it was very much inspired the theme song or the theme music to the ESPN show Pardon the Interruption. So if you ever watch that, the intro music to that is kind of it's taken a cue from Cut Your Hair.
I thought it was a sample the first time I ever saw that show.
It's not. I don't think it's exactly it, but it's like it's like a replica of it. But it's very similar, and it's clear that they were taking from that. So
it's royalty similar.
Yes, it could. Yes, and it might be. I didn't read anything about royalties or anything like that. I just said it was like, it was, taken from this. But anyway, so I don't even know if Malkmus would have it in him to sue somebody over it because he'd be like, whatever.
I was gonna say, I feel like that would be too much work. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know, Josh. To me, this is a record. This is a grower, probably more so than Slanted and Enchanted. But I think if you're for me, like I stuck with it, and I think it's excellent. It's a really good record, and again, combining the discordant and like the off-putting nature with it, with underneath couched in really good melodies and really good hooks at times. It's a unique record, and I'm very high on it. So definitely thumbs up for me.
I'm losing a lot of my fun takes I used to be able to have to argue with people, guys. I lost the Pink Floyd one, I lost the Pavement one, so I'm curious to see how many other ones I continue to lose along the way, because I agree with you, Matt. This is a solid album.
Yeah. Well, John,